It's Wednesday, September 7th, 2016, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues, Mike McKean and Earnest Perry. It's wheels up for Air Hillary. The Clinton-Kaine camp is the first to welcome reporters on its campaign airplane. The Wall Street Journal published two very different front pages following Donald Trump's visit to Mexico. Was it media bias or the evolution of a story? And the shortest piece in the history of the New York Times. I'll read it to you, all of it, and we'll talk about the strange story of how it ended up in print to begin with. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to before our half hour's up, but first, the 2 months since former Fox News anchor Gretchen Carlson filed her sexual harassment suit against Roger Ailes and Fox News. Since then, we've seen dozens of other women step up, detailing their experiences working for him. We've seen his ouster from Fox News. We've seen evidence that he's potentially tapped into the phones of New York Magazine's Gabriel Sherman, who in 2014 published a less than complimentary biography. Well, we've reached the next chapter in the saga. Yesterday, the network announced it reached a settlement with Carlson, agreeing to a $20 million payout. And get this, a public apology. When we first talked about this 2 months ago, we figured there was going to be some kind of settlement, but we never figured that we would know as many details about the amount of money and that there would ever be a public apology.
I mean, I think that most likely Fox News wanted the amount to be published and wanted to put the apology out there to try to put some distance between the Ailes era and the current era, which would all be fine and good. I mean, $20 million is a huge settlement, and the apology reads like a sincere apology. But some of Ailes' old lieutenants are still running the shop, and there's no indication at this point whether or not the atmosphere that existed within Fox News has changed that much. We just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I found surprising was the apology part of it. I mean, I expected the settlement. I agree with Mike. I am a little surprised that the number came out, and the number came out from Fox and not from an unidentified source, is what usually happens in these cases.
Somebody close to the negotiations said.
Exactly. But I was really surprised by the apology, because this is so un-Fox-like for them to apologize about anything. So to see the apology come out and the way it came out, that was really surprising to me.
I mean, I think it's somewhat schizophrenic because Rupert Murdoch has stepped in temporarily to basically be in charge, but his sons, who really didn't like Roger Ailes, are the ones who are going to be running the company, and they may have had something to do with the apology. We don't know. One thing I find real interesting, though, is that maybe they didn't have a lot of choice, because Gretchen Carlson was one smart cookie in a lot of ways, including the fact that she took in her iPhone, apparently, into some of those meetings with Ailes and recorded the things that she said that he said to her. The part that I find also kind of interesting is that the Fox parent company apologized and paid the settlement. Roger Ailes isn't paying a penny of that settlement, and he's not apologizing. In fact, he's threatening to sue the reporter you just mentioned at the New York Magazine because he's allegedly been libeled. And one of the attorneys
he's lawyered up. Yeah, he's lawyered up with a pretty big name.
He lawyered up with one of the lawyers that helped Hulk Hogan take down Gawker. So,
and is also representing Melania Trump also in libel cases.
Well, I mean, what the other thing that sort of surprises me about this is that, I mean, and it goes back to what Mike was talking about, is that you still have Fox lieutenants running the operation, and you're still hearing rumblings coming out of there about other instances in which Ailes was sexually harassing women. You have some of the people who were part of sort of his cabal, which are trying to tamp things down, and then you have this come out. I wonder what's the foundation there? And when I say foundation, I mean, what's happening there? It just seems like a lot of things are crumbling underneath Fox at probably the most important time in any cable news network. You're talking about the presidential election.
Right. Well, so you mentioned about a foundation crumbling. There were more moves at Fox yesterday. We learned that Greta Van Susteren is leaving the network. She announced her departure on her Facebook page, saying she hasn't felt at home there in years and is using a clause in her contract that allows her to walk away right now. She had also mentioned her time to be able to walk away was limited. What is there to read between the lines there?
I'm not really sure. I mean, obviously she wasn't happy. And or, as the folks at Fox are alleging, she was simply using it as a negotiating tactic, the vulnerability of Fox News at the moment because of the Ailes ouster to try to get more money.
And from what I'm reading, that was the clause, that
Yeah.
if I think it was called the key man clause,
Right.
that if the person at the top was to leave, that would be her opportunity for an out.
But she was also publicly supportive of Ailes before he was ousted and immediately after he was. So was she really unhappy the past couple of years? Maybe she was privately. Maybe, like maybe Megyn Kelly, she was not going to go forward publicly and say things that she was willing to tell investigators behind the scenes. So we really don't know.
I mean, to me, it would be interesting to see that they've done this long investigation in light of Gretchen Carlson, and whether or not Megyn Kelly was a part of that. Greta Van Sessner was a part of that, and was there going to be some more that was going to come out, and maybe she used that as a negotiating tactic to try to get more money, and it backfired because Rupert Murdoch basically said, no, I'm not going to do this. And I think part of it comes from the fact that she's not one of their big stars. She's not Bill O'Reilly. She's not Megyn Kelly. And their contracts are coming up for renewal, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But she wasn't seen as a big star, and he probably looked at it and said, hey, I think I can afford to let you go and work with what I have.
Well, and Britt Hume is the person who's taking her time slot now, that
And he
6
is.
p.m. Central. Right, and
He
he
is one
does
of-
fit into
yes.
that list of big names that has been the Fox News brand for so long.
Right. And it's interesting, too. They obviously didn't think that she was critical to the future of Fox News because they didn't even let her say goodbye. I mean, they basically just delivered a note to her home saying, you're off the air immediately. They took down her website. They took down her blog. They basically made her persona non grata.
Yeah, she became an unperson very quickly. Yeah. At the end of that statement, she said that she hopes to continue her career in broadcasting. Any ideas where she could potentially end up? And do you think it's before the election or after?
This is going to be the interesting part. I'm wondering whether she's going to end up anywhere, because Fox was the one place where she made her name. I mean, she started there in 2002 as a legal analyst, I think, involving one of the big trials. It may have been O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, I think she started on Court TV, during the O.J. Simpson trial in the late 90s and then moved from there.
And then moved into Fox. So I don't see where she could probably land unless it's one of the other cable stations. But because she's been so connected to the conservative side of the legal arguments, I think it's going to be difficult for her to be able to carve out a place at one of the other networks. But you never know. She may find something somewhere else.
Even if one of the other networks does want her, I believe she has a non-compete clause in her contract, so it probably is going to be after the elections before she could move somewhere else.
Okay, well, speaking of the elections, the Commission on Presidential Debates announced the moderators for the 3 upcoming presidential debates. Lester Holt will moderate one on September 26th. ABC's Martha Raddatz and CNN's Anderson Cooper, along with Fox News Channel's Chris Wallace, are lined up for the others. CBS's Elaine Quijano will moderate a debate between Mike Pence and Tim Kaine in early October. The Commission's choice to tap Chris Wallace is a first for Fox News Channel. Media critic Howard Kurtz asked him about that on Sunday's program, Media Buzz.
When you're on that big stage in Las Vegas, it's not like hosting a Sunday show, correct?
No, it's very different, and I'm very mindful of that. It isn't coming up with a killer question, not coming up with the great follow-up. I see myself as a conduit to ask the questions and basically to get the 2 candidates, or as I say, if one of the other people is on the stage as well, one of the third-party candidates, but to get the candidates to engage. I view it as kind of being a referee in a heavyweight championship fight. If it succeeds, when it's over, people will say, you did a great job. I don't remember you ever even being on the stage.
Well, I understand that. I think that's the right approach, not making it about you. On the other hand, there's a lot on your shoulders, both in terms of the question selection, but also as they go at it, let's say Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, what do you do if they make assertions that you know to be untrue?
That's not my job.
That's not your job.
I do not believe that it's my job to be a truth squad. It's up to the other person to catch them on that.
So let me ask you, do you agree with that? Is that not his job?
I think it is his job. I mean, if either candidate makes a statement that is blatantly false, then I think it is incumbent upon the the moderator to at least point that out. Now, he doesn't need to directly call him on it, but at least point it out if the other candidate doesn't do that. I think what Chris Wallace is saying is that he's expecting the other candidate to bring that point up. But if it's not brought up, then I think it is the moderator's responsibility to say, well, wait a minute, there are accurate facts out there which disprove the statement that you just made.
I'm going to respectfully disagree with that. I mean, I think that Chris Wallace is absolutely right. That doesn't mean he's being soft on the candidates. If you watched the primary debate that he moderated, where in his questions he brought up slates and everything showing, well, you said this in one point and you said this at another time, he can ask a question that draws out the contradictions between what a candidate says or doesn't say. But I think he's absolutely right. It's not the moderator's role to be constantly inserting themselves into the debate. A good debate will have those candidates going after each other. And what you don't want to have happen is what happened with Candy Crowley back in the last presidential debate that we all watched with Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. So she basically tried to correct Romney on a statement that wasn't a yes or no statement. Some people interpret it one way, some people interpret it another way, what the White House said and did about Benghazi in the early days, and it was not right for Crowley to insert herself and perhaps assume that it was a simpler answer than it really was.
Well, I'm not saying that the moderator should insert themselves into the debate, but I do think that they can make a correction if it's warranted, if the other candidates are doing that. I don't think that they should stop a candidate in the middle of his or her statement and say, but you're wrong on that. I think that's up to the other candidates to do that. But I do think that if that correction has not been made, then I think the American public, they owe the American public at least that much to say, well, wait a minute,
But I mean, that would assume, I think, that you aren't going to have people fact-checking it afterwards, immediately afterwards, or even in real time in some instances. There's going to be all kinds of journalism written about what was truthful and what wasn't in the debate. I just think the moment is for the American people to evaluate these two candidates against each other. And as he says, the less the moderator is sticking out in their role as the moderator, the better the debate's going to be.
Well, one of the things I do want to, I would hope that the questions that are being asked by the moderators will elicit answers and statements from the candidates that will get some clear answers.
I agree with you.
Chris
Wallace is a tough question.
Right.
And that was going to be my question is, do you trust Chris Wallace, again, as the first ever Fox News Channel debate moderator in a general election, to do that?
If you watch Chris Wallace and you know anything about him as a journalist, you say yes. If you're a hyper-partisan on the left side of this equation, then you're going to say no.
I mean, I would agree with that. I would prefer to have Chris Wallace than Brit Hume, because I've seen Chris Wallace ask those tough questions of both the Republican candidates as well as the Democrats on his show and in other venues. And I think that if he follows the script that he normally uses, I think he's going to be a great moderator, or has the potential to be a great moderator that's not seen once the debate is over.
I'm wondering what you think about this other controversy that kind of flared up, the fact that despite some lobbying by Jorge Ramos at Univision and others, that there is not a Spanish language moderator among the four people moderating the five, actually, if you count the vice presidential.
I am surprised by that, because I thought that we had reached a point where we would see that. But that didn't happen, and I wonder if the fact that we've had this such controversy about immigration and what some of the things that Donald Trump has said may have caused it to go in a direction that doesn't have that. But wouldn't
that controversy make it even more important to go ahead and have that step?
To me, it makes it more important that we do that. What I'm worried about is, what I'm concerned about is that the commission doesn't want to have that controversy.
They certainly didn't want to have Jorge Ramos do it, because he's had personal public run-ins with Trump, and so he might not come across as an impartial journalist. But there are plenty of other Hispanic journalists who could do it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that I would have liked to have seen that. I think that it would be good for the public, especially the Hispanic population within the country, to see that whether you conduct it in English or you conduct it in Spanish, to me it doesn't really matter. I just think that is a segment of the population that deserves to have some sort of representation in such an important venue.
Well, especially given, again, we've talked about the controversies around immigration. And interestingly enough, our next topic to talk about is Donald Trump's visit to Mexico last week, the last-minute visit, which caught a lot of folks off guard. And not only the trip itself, but how the story developed and how narratives changed through the course of the day. Maybe you caught sight of the different editions of the Wall Street Journal. One carried the headline, "Trump softens his tone." The other, "Trump talks tough on Wall." We should thank one of our listeners, Michael Beneke, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, for writing in and asking us to take on this topic a little bit today and to talk about it. There were a lot of people out there not necessarily understanding how zoning or late editions of newspapers work, thinking maybe this was media bias at play.
Yeah, and of course the immediate jump for a lot of people is, oh, well, the Wall Street Journal is trying to cater to one audience over here that's pro-Clinton, and then they're trying to cater to another audience that's pro-Trump, and it had nothing to do with that. The fact was that, I mean, this is an historic situation where a major party presidential candidate takes two diametrically opposed positions on an issue on the same day.
Within hours.
Within 12 hours.
Yeah, not even, I don't even know that it was that long.
And so the Wall Street Journal, as you were suggesting, so they had these two different headlines because they had two different editions. An early edition before he spoke, which was kind of late in the evening in Phoenix, where he basically went about and talked about the wall and all of this stuff again, had the headline that made him sound more like a statesman. And then the later headline came after he made the speech in Phoenix in a later edition that was going out on the streets hours after that. So that's why you had the two different headlines.
But I mean, the New York Times had problems on their website. I mean, they had, it's at 11 o'clock. Soon after Trump had talked in Phoenix, they still had their earlier story up in which he had this softer tone when he was in Mexico City. So, I mean, they were having problems with that. And I think this is one of those things where the news cycle itself, even in this fast-paced digital age, couldn't keep up with the changing dynamics of the Trump campaign.
Okay, well, fun fact for those of you at home, if you are looking at a print edition of a newspaper and see something like that, take a look and you can see the number of stars in the masthead at the top of the front page. The more stars, the later edition of that paper. Last week we were talking about Hillary Clinton's limiting press availability. Well, this week the protective pool has taken off. Reporters boarded for the first time Monday. Amy Chozick of the New York Times filed this video via Snapchat.
We're on board the new Hillary plane. That was Huma Abedin, her longtime aide in the front. The reporters are sitting in the back.
I am so happy to have all of you with me. I've been just waiting for this moment.
She has been just waiting for this moment. There have been a couple of times where Hillary Clinton has, since Monday, gone to the cheap seats in the plane, gone in back and spoken to reporters, opened up the gaggle.
I mean, PolitiFact has the truthometer for what there should be a sarcasmometer in that situation.
Exactly, yeah.
Hillary Clinton is not anxious to have those reporters on the plane, but she knew she probably needed to have them on the plane. We talked about this a little bit last week, and while she was ahead comfortably in the polls in all these swing states, what was in it for her to have the reporters even closer and possible embarrassing moments or questions coming up? As you might have seen yesterday, there was a new national survey, and we can talk about the ins and outs of that, but the national survey of likely voters suggested that Trump was ahead by 2 percentage points, essentially tied statistically. And so maybe that might tell you something about why suddenly the reporters are on the
motivation.
plane.
Oh, I think it had everything to do with that. I mean, it was week after week after week, she was getting beat up by the national press because they weren't getting access, i.e. they weren't on the plane with her when she went from stop to stop. Well, one of the issues there was that she really wasn't campaigning. She was out raising money because what she's planning to do, what she's in the process of doing now is I'm going to be on the road every single day. I need to have enough money to make this happen. I need to have the money for the commercials. I need to have the money for the plane. I need to have money for everything. So she spent the entire month of August going from one stop to the next, basically raising money, and didn't need the press for that. but she got beat up in the process, and now she's trying to rehabilitate that.
I mean, we could, by the way, point out, as I'm sure you would, Amy, if I didn't, that Donald Trump isn't allowing reporters on his campaign plane on a regular basis either.
Right, and there have been a few interviews, and I think what struck me about the interviews I have seen from inside the plane is how different they look. If you were to look at them aesthetically, Hillary Clinton's plane looks like your standard commercial aircraft with a first-class cabin that would look like what you would expect, and then the economy cabin. You look inside the Trump plane, and it looks like a private jet, an executive jet.
It's exactly what it is. I mean, he pretty much converted his executive plane into his campaign plane, and there you go. But now he's letting reporters on, and he's pretty much
letting them on for a visit.
Well,
he's
for
not
a visit,
transporting.
he's not. Yeah, you're gonna have to find your own way to the
Right.
next stop. But I'll let you. Once I land, you can come in and we can have a conversation.
By the way, can you imagine sort of the scratching of heads on the part of some of the professionals on the Clinton campaign? I mean, they're raising all this money. We're way ahead in the swing states. They've got a huge ground game going. Trump has not raised as much money. He's hardly running any ads. He's doing a 180 on the same day on a major issue that defines his presidential campaign. And yet, if you believe this latest poll that CNN was touting, they're even, basically. Now, I would say that we need to talk about the polls, and we're going to need to talk about them a lot from now until Election Day, because that was a national poll. You're not elected based on your vote count nationally. You're elected by the Electoral College, how you do in the individual states. And the Washington Post had a really great online survey of all 50 states this past week. Came out the same day, I think, that the new CNN poll came out, and it still showed that Hillary Clinton had a large advantage in the states that are going to make a difference in terms of winning.
When you look at that poll, I mean, if you go and look at the map that the Washington Post did, I think this is the startling thing, is that she's competing in Georgia, she's competing in Texas,
she's competing here,
she's competing in Missouri, she's competing in Arizona. I mean, these are red states.
Yep. And today, the Dallas Morning News endorsed her. First time in decades, if not
since
ever.
1968
there you
that
go.
they've endorsed a Democrat.
That doesn't mean that there aren't methodological issues
True.
with all these kinds of surveys.
Because those
we
are
could
all
get them wrong,
absolutely.
but the Brexit surveys were wrong. Lots of surveys in the primaries were wrong. I think maybe we should focus a little less on the surveys and a little more on the policies.
No, I agree with you. And the one thing that is not being talked about is the fact that the likability scale for both of these candidates is so low that it's going to have an impact on the election.
Well, so what happens when a comment on a website goes from the sharing of a thought or an opinion to an endorsement of a candidate? Until about an hour or so ago, there had been something published on the Bismarck Tribune that newspaper had changed its comment policy and was going to be charging anyone who issued an endorsement $50 and an advertisement fee. Now, it's a little bit unclear to us now that page is no longer available if the policy was being changed. They actually took the page down. But, Mike, you raised a really good point. That happens here in the Columbia area at the Daily Tribune.
Yeah, I mean, I think every year there's a story like this. Oh, why can you believe it that a newspaper is charging people to express their opinions? Well, right or wrong, this has been going on for a long time. The Columbia Daily Tribune has had this policy. In fact, I checked just to make sure, and it says paid election letters, all letters of endorsement of candidates or ballot issues will be published with a fee of $25 for up to 100 words and 50 cents for every 100 words after that. And I think it's a legitimate policy because most of the endorsement letters are frankly copied from some interest group and then you put your name on them. It's not really that they're trying to keep ordinary voters from expressing their opinions. They're figuring if you're going to bombard me with these cut and paste letters, we're going to make something from it.
I have no reason, as far as I'm concerned, I think they should do that. I mean, especially if you're cutting and pasting from some special interest group or from a political campaign. And I think that this is one way in which newspapers can get revenue. Television stations and radio stations are getting revenue through the commercials. Here's another opportunity for them to do that, especially if it is a bombardment by a particular political side.
Okay, well, an interesting study to bring up to you, a look at implications of mobile technology on the delivery of news. It comes from the Shorenstein Center at Harvard University. The big headline, the rise of mobile could end up creating a second-class digital citizenship of less informed news consumers. What does this really mean? Are we creating a knowledge gap?
Well, this, and I have to confess, I didn't read all of the research behind this study, but they're basically the authors saying that the mobile platform is a very hard platform for people to consume news on, and they say that it's one of those high choice media where you've got so many things happening on your mobile device. Consuming news may not be one of those things that rises to the top. That, I don't know, that may or may not be true, but what I would say is important is that what do we do about it? Is it the fault of the technology or the fault of the users that they're not getting news on mobile devices? No. It's how we deliver the content.
Yeah, I would almost see mobile as an opportunity. To me, this seemed counterintuitive when we think of nations where internet penetration is lower, especially on broadband, but mobile phone use is very high, that this becomes one of the primary vehicles to get the internet in people's hands.
Well, I also think, what are people using it for? If they're using it to get information that they need right then and there, then news is probably going to be low on that. But otherwise, I think it is a vehicle that people can use in order to get news and information that matters to them.
There were a couple of links that were interesting, or diagrams within that study. One of them I thought was interesting was that people were more likely to understand the news if they got it from a mobile app, a native app, as opposed to something on the browser on your mobile phone, although people tend to come to news sites through browsers rather than through apps. And so the question is, how do you create an experience that's compelling for people on the phone? Because when you do create a compelling experience, people will spend many more minutes on a story than you think they would on their telephone.
Okay, so before we go, the long and short of what's believed to be the shortest story printed in the history of the New York Times. Let me read it to you. The headline: when I'm mistakenly put on an email chain, should I hit reply all asking to be removed? Here's the full text. No. Period. That's one word, one punctuation mark. Bold use of the printed page.
I like it. I mean, because it answers the question.
You don't want people to reply all.
Don't reply all. And we all get those emails, and it drives us crazy. It's like, why are you sending this to everybody when you could just send it to the person that sent the original email?
Agree with that 100%. It was an interesting and fun playoff of a little mini controversy inside the Times newsroom where they accidentally were bombarding all the employees of the Times with something that probably shouldn't have gone out to everybody. So really clever, I thought.
It was very clever, and people were talking about it and still are. Well, we are just about out of time for today. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about the topics that we talked about on today's program. Check out our links blog. That's under the Programs tab at KBIA.org. We invite you to like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @views on KBIA. You can also listen to our podcast that's downloadable through the KBIA website, or you can find it on the NPR One app. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, to leave us comments and questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, and to Pat Akers for handling the audio. Megan Sheets is our associate producer. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.